Hi there, everybody. This is our first experience doing a YouTube live event. So I am here with Matt Bell, our consultant on the transportation system plan update. Hopefully we got some folks out there listening. We are going to talk about transportation issues in the city of Independence. What the transportation system plan looks at is the community over the next 20 years and what sort of transportation improvements, be it roads or biking or walking or transit or whatever it might be, freight, all of those things, we sort of look at all of those and we try and use a crystal ball to see where the community is going to be at in 20 years and then try and plan for appropriate improvements for that growth. Now, this project is pretty interesting, it seems to me, because I guess I'll share my screen here. Where's my screen share? There it is. Screen share. Because fundamentally what we've got some issues in the community, right? So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about just a few of the issues, and we have hopefully it set up to be if people have questions, they can send in those questions. We also have translation services available, so if you would like it translated, we do have an individual that is standing by to translate for us. So anyways, hopefully all of that stuff, all of those materials are on the YouTube page. If you have a question, feel free to type it in. We are more than happy to answer it. All right. So transportation system plan update looks at the community over the next 20 years. And fundamentally, we've got some key issues. When we first started this project, one of the first things that we said to Kittleson and Associates, that we said to Matt was, we have some deficiencies in west-east connectivity through the community. So if you look at our community, there's two main routes through the community, west and east. It's Hoffman Road and Monmouth Street, right? Really, there's not a whole lot of connectivity otherwise. So you'll see G or F doesn't connect to Madrona, Gwynn doesn't connect to Chestnut, and then Mountain Fir, which is envisioned as arterial, sort of something like Hoffman on the south side, has not yet gone through. We have some issues associated with that, including the railroad and a stream crossing potentially. Also, I'll just point out, even the bridge doesn't connect into the west-east connectivity all that well. So you've got River Road right here, and it dead ends at I Street, and it doesn't really go across the railroad tracks. So this west-east connectivity and lack thereof is a key issue, and that's something that we've definitely been wrestling with this project. Another thing, which is less obvious, is we actually don't have a whole lot of north-south connectivity either in the community. For example, if you look, good connectivity across Monmouth Street, we have basically two ways, north and south, that go from, say, the south part of town to Hoffman Road or Polk Street. Those include Main Street and 16th Street. All the other connections don't quite line up. So if you look at 13th, it doesn't quite line up to Gun Club. If you look at 10th, continuing north would hit the sewer ponds. Looking at 7th goes across Monmouth, but then it stops right there at the park. The only other real kind of decent route north and south through the community is 4th Street, and it goes from 4th and then to Ash up to Polk. So why do I bring that up? Why is this like a key problem statement? Because fundamentally, when we have limited connectivity west and east and limited connectivity north and south, essentially what happens is all the traffic gets funneled to a few key intersections. And so, so that's really what we're trying to address is how do we get better connectivity in the community and what should we do with these intersections? So essentially, we're not probably going to get to everything tonight. I mean, we'll see, but we do want to focus on three major issues that we think sort of summarize these things. Those three issues are existing alternatives for intersections on Main Street, alternatives for intersection, and that includes at River Road, at Main and Monmouth, and at Polk and Main. And then a second question that we're gonna sort of explore is the idea of how do people in the Southwest area access the larger transportation system. That will be our second key thing that we explore. And then the third thing is we'll try and get to pedestrian and bike connectivity through the community. So anyways, with us tonight, I told Matt when we started this that ultimately I wanted to pretend like I was the host, right? And so that's really what we're going for tonight. I am the talk show host. Matt is the technical expert here to help us understand these issues, help us explore these issues in greater detail. So welcome, Matt. You want to tell us a little about yourself or anything?
Sure. My name is Matt Bell, and I'm a consultant with a traffic engineering and transportation planning firm. And my background is primarily in transportation planning with a focus in communities, much like Independence. And one of my main interests in this TSP and this project in particular was just like Fred has articulated there, is really trying to find ways for people to make it easier for people to get around, whether it's in their vehicle or or they're walking or they're biking or they're taking transit. And so I think with what Fred shared as sort of the key issues that has really served as a backdrop to a lot of the work that we've done, and a lot of the work that we're still currently in the process of doing. So maybe just a little, is it a good time to give them an update on where we are in the overall process?
That would be great.
Yeah. So we're about a third to somewhere between a third and a half the way through our overall process, and so far we've evaluated existing conditions, so looked at existing traffic operations, looked at existing bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, and identified what we feel like are the near term issues that need to be addressed as part of the transportation system plan. We've also projected out into the future and used our crystal ball to determine where future growth and employment and housing is going to occur, and how the people are going to get to those new houses and new jobs, and what kind of an impact that's going to have on the system as a whole. And then we've estimated what those impacts are going to be and what the future needs are going to be for the system. And as you can probably imagine, like additional connectivity is certainly going to be needed, particularly to the southwest part of town. Some new intersection configurations, which is some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Definitely some new bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and some facilities, different options there, integrating that in with the trail system. And so we've looked at a lot of different alternatives for how to address these things. Some of the alternatives are what I would consider to be fairly straightforward and may not have a lot of trade-offs, but others, and again, largely the ones we're going to talk about tonight, we feel like have fairly significant trade-offs and really warrant a bigger community discussion.
That's exactly right. As planners, we sort of consider alternatives and then weigh the impacts of the various alternatives. And so Some of these ideas are just that they're alternatives. They will not necessarily go forward, but it's important that we at least look at them, especially if it might make sense. And so, your statement about the trade-offs is exactly right. Some of these things, I mean, transportation. I like to think of transportation as one of the more lasting components of the built environment. Um, you can change out a window, you can change its paint color on the side of a building, but it's much more difficult and complicated to move a road, right? And so that's really why we're looking at this and considering these alternatives. Now, sort of going forward, let's take some of these key issues. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Monmouth Street and Main Street. And I know folks who have driven through town have definitely seen backups at this intersection. I'll just tell a story. My kids used to do Kung Fu here at Central Martial Arts pre-COVID, right? And my wife and I would sit on a bench right there and watch traffic essentially crawl through this intersection. So yeah, we basically everybody in town realizes that this is an issue. Part of the issue is the fact that the connectivity is so poor. You almost have to go through this intersection if you're going north, or if you're trying to access Monmouth Street to go west. Now, this intersection too is a key component of our downtown. It's important for pedestrians. It's important for commerce, and when we funnel a whole bunch of new traffic into it by the year 2040, the intersection just does not perform very well. Now, Matt, what are some of the options that we have for this intersection?
Yeah, we can walk through them. I think some of the maybe the more obvious choices that we've considered out there are things like signalization. I think that's probably something that some people might want to jump to, but there are a lot of implications that come with installing a traffic signal out at this location. Certainly would increase the capacity and probably allow it to operate a little bit more efficiently. But when you have a traffic signal, you often need additional turn lanes. So we took a small step back and just looked at it with new turn lanes. And the diagram that you see now looks at what would be a northbound left turn from Main onto Monmouth, or potentially a southbound right turn from Main onto Monmouth. Both of those two turning movements combined would sort of free up some of that traffic to allow it to run a little bit more smoothly. A traffic signal would certainly boost that a little bit. But as I mentioned a moment ago, there are some trade-offs with this. You can see that this intersection currently has curb extensions that keep those crossing distances short, that slow traffic down as it's traveling through the intersection. And so providing the additional turn lanes with or without a traffic signal does eliminate the potential to maintain those curb extensions. So certainly one of the trade-offs, regardless of the alternative that we select at this location, is going to be to some degree pedestrian and bicycle access and connectivity through this intersection.
Great. So we did get a question. One of the questions that is from John Corbin. He asks if all the options that we're presenting are able to be funded. Would you like to discuss how funding and that whole those things are considered as part of this?
Yeah. So there's a few things at play here. One, and people are probably fairly aware that both Main Street to the north and Monmouth Street to the west are both ODOT facilities. So they're owned, operated, and maintained by the Oregon Department of Transportation. So ODOT uses local transportation system plans like we're working on here to identify and prioritize improvements on their transportation system. So if they have a failing intersection, this would be one that would make it onto their list of needed improvements and ultimately make it onto their what they call their statewide transportation improvement program, or their STIP program, which is a 4-year funding program, much like a city's capital improvement program, but on a statewide basis. It would be competing with other intersections and other communities that are having similar challenges and other projects. So ultimately, funding for this could come from ODOT. A portion of the funding could also come from the city, and or could be kind of a combination of the two. Funding could also potentially come from private development, as the as if a project is identified in the transportation system plan for this intersection, future development comes in and adds additional traffic to this intersection, that developer could potentially be contributing to the cost of improving the intersection. There's a variety of funding sources. We're not at a stage yet where I think that we're funding and cost and things like that are certainly factoring into our decision-making process here, particularly as we're selecting a preferred alternative. But we haven't started to really evaluate those costs in a lot of detail just yet.
The plan itself, it has to be fiscally constrained. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, so it has to be feasible. So John responded, got it. So this doesn't necessarily come out of the city budget then?
That's correct.
Perfect. All right. So let's keep on going on with the alternatives at Main. Now, the one of the key points that you made about the turn lanes at this intersection is that if we do that, potentially some of the pedestrian facilities, potentially some of the things like parking in the area will need to go away to accommodate the turn lanes. And can you explain why that is?
Yeah, and thank you for that, Fred. I should have mentioned that parking would also be impacted in addition to eliminating the curb extensions. On-street parking would likely go away for at a minimum a 1 block for the distance of about 1 block approaching this intersection. So that's a fairly significant impact in a built-up commercial area that does rely a lot on on-street parking. So that's primarily and that's primarily because just the space that's needed for the additional lane. And there isn't, like currently the way that the roadway is configured is it has the 2 travel lanes and it has on-street parking. So in order to provide that additional lane, which is about 12 feet wide, you would need to take upwards of 6 feet from each side to provide the additional lane, leaving about 2 feet on each side for parking, which is not sufficient to maintain parking. There's some actually pretty good examples of this in downtown Monmouth, and the name of the north-south roadway is escaping me, but the east-west approach, it's to one of their only signals in town, has a very similar configuration to this, where you would have a separate left turn lane that essentially takes up that parking for about a block.
Right. All right. So we got another question. Is there any consideration of improvements to Second to divert some traffic there? And we can sort of get to that as we look at some of these other options that are not really necessarily trying to solve the intersection issue at the intersection. One of the alternatives is the one-way couplet. Would you explain what a one-way couplet is and how it might work in the city of Independence?
Yeah, so most people are familiar with the concept of a couplet. So this is not entirely unique, but the in this particular case, we had identified C Street as the potential. So we take the 2-way traffic from Monmouth Street and we split it into 1-way traffic on Monmouth and 1-way traffic on C Street. The one that's shown here, the couplet extends up to 4th Street, And we've had questions in the past about why we selected Fourth Street, particularly because of the school right there in the corner. But the biggest reason for that is just Fourth Street is one of the more major streets in this area, provides that additional connectivity, and is like there's a variety of reasons for Fourth Street. But the concept of a couplet could extend beyond Fourth Street, and it could be shorter. And I think we have an option here to illustrate that. This is the same thing, just flip to the other side. So now the one-way direction is on D Street. Monmouth Street continues to serve the heading towards Monmouth. D Street comes back towards Main, and again, it's another form of a couplet.
Can you explain to me how traffic at the end of the couplet would interact with the traffic on Main Street?
Yeah, that's a that's a great question. So in this case, when you eliminate one of the movements, in this case, you're eliminating your map is messing up my orientation. The eastbound approach, or the eastbound approach to Main Street, or the westbound approach there on D Street. When you're eliminating those movements, all of that traffic, those turn movements, which is causing a majority of the delay, is split between the two intersections. And so it allows more free flow of movements. It doesn't require the sort of a start and stop and exchange for different vehicles to go at different times. It's much more free flow in that sense.
Gotcha.
So both of these intersections collectively, D Street and Main Street, Monmouth Street and Main Street, would operate significantly better than they do today.
Gotcha. Now, another option that got thrown out there, and it sounded like some folks had some questions about it, wanted a diagram of it, was the idea of a square about. Can you explain what a square about is?
Yeah, I think the diagrams that you've got here, Fred, are really very well laid out. And essentially, this is like kind of a short couplet in a lot of ways. So it's really using that combination of Monmouth Street and Second Street, and I believe, just looking at the orientation of that's
D.
That's D down there.
Yep.
So D Street as a way to serve that. I think that I've also seen a similar configuration that goes up around C Street. But this is essentially like taking a couplet, squishing it down to one block.
Yeah, or something similar to like a roundabout, but doing it around a city block that instead of a circle.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it as well.
So explain to me, because I remember that we talked about this with in one of the technical meetings. How does parking work with something like that?
So in this case, you don't need to have you wouldn't need to have the separate turn lanes like we were showing in the previous intersection configuration. So parking isn't impacted the same way it would be as if we were trying to make everything happen right there at Main and Monmouth. So you get to maintain the parking, you get to maintain the curb extensions. The orientation of the parking would just follow the same direction of the traffic. You wouldn't have anything sort of funny going on with bi-directional traffic and parking. But essentially be the same as it is today.
Gotcha. Yeah, there things like this. I mean, would likely need to be accompanied by some degree of signage, because you wouldn't want somebody to come in from Monmouth and then all of a sudden miss downtown Independence.
Definitely. You definitely need some signage to help support this. There's likely also going to be some potential what we would call channelization in some cases. So these are just raised curbs that help kind of guide folks in the direction that they need to be going, particularly at some of these intersections where the vehicles are sort of approaching each other, right there where Fred's got the hand.
Yep, you bet. That's exactly right. Now, a variant of this idea is more of a rectangle. Call it a rectangle about, go from essentially take the same concept, and rather than putting it on Monmouth, to put it on C and then D. Um, so same sort of thing. One interesting thing about this idea was that potentially Monmouth Street could have some more pedestrian space on it, for a portion of it. Though, I mean, that is a gas station right there, which might not make sense pulling the pedestrian space all the way through. But I mean, that would link to the library. It is an interesting idea. But can you explain this idea in further detail?
Yeah, there just like you said, it's sort of like an extended version of a square about. It's a rectangle about. I like that name as well. And I think what you were just talking about is converting Monmouth Street into more of what we might call a festival street or a plaza of sorts. And it could be the kind of thing where, like you say, vehicles are restricted on there, or maybe they're partially restricted on there. There could be a variety of different ways that you could utilize that street, but essentially, the the primary flow of traffic would follow the pattern that's shown. So you would whether you're going to the north or to the south, you would take that portion of Second Street down to D Street and then come back on Main.
Great. All right, and then I suppose there were a number of other alternatives. One of the alternatives that is getting mentioned is just essentially constructing that southern arterial. This one conceptualizes more of instead of doing the southern arterial at the south end of the community, it envisions some sort of improvement, be it at second or third or fourth, that potentially helps the traffic at Monmouth and Main. Now, I'm curious, is something like that feasible? Would something like that work to help sort of help people get through the downtown area?
Yeah, and I think we've talked a little bit about this one as well, and that's that we recognize that today that some people are utilizing D Street and C Street to avoid trying to travel through Monmouth and Main. And at some point, they're likely reconnecting with Monmouth further down the line. And so we're just recognizing that an intersection, whether it's a third or fourth, and sometimes we've also talked about Seventh Street as potentially being that access point where people can reconnect with Monmouth Street. The benefit of both fourth and seventh is that fourth again is one of those north-south streets that connects a good distance to the north and the south. Seventh is another good option because the long-term vision for that is to go further to the south and serve the southwest area. But just to back up for a brief moment, one of the things that you just mentioned, it sounds like maybe we're getting some feedback on it, is the southern arterial. So all of these alternatives that we've developed and all of these evaluations that we've done have been largely within the context of with kind of two future scenarios in mind. One is without the southern arterial, and one is with the southern arterial. And it may not come as a surprise to folks, but with that southern arterial in place, a lot of the traffic that we're currently envisioning being added to the system could take advantage of that southern arterial. So if you think about where a lot of the development is envisioned to occur over the long term, it's in that southwest area. And so providing that southern arterial would be a direct connection from to that area from anywhere along Main Street or potentially coming across the bridge. So there's a lot of really good reasons to develop that. There's also a lot of really good reasons to think about the long-term potential for that as we're developing alternatives for these intersections as well, and not to overdo it if we know that the long term is to have that southern arterial in place.
Right. yeah, I think that makes sense. So, for example, would some of these, based on that, would some of these improvements be necessary if we had a southern arterial in place? And does it make sense to continue to pursue these alternatives with or without a southern arterial?
Yeah, I think that Monmouth and Maine, as as you already mentioned, is problematic today, and we saw that. You see that when you stand out there. We saw that in our analysis, and some of the other intersections that we would envision, like long-term challenges at Fourth and Seventh, and some of the other intersections. There are going to be some things that you can do to improve those intersections or to add capacity for future growth. It's just it's less serious of a situation, I think, in the long term. Whenever you have that arterial in place, like you may not need turn lanes, you may not need center turn lanes, you may not need traffic signals and things like that when you have that there. You may need to rethink about some of the circulation. So I think some of the circulation ideas that you have here are good, but it's certainly not something that would um, be as significant with that southern arterial in place.
Right. Perfect. So a question that we got, or a statement, and it's probably about the rectangle about or the square about. They said, a concern I would have with this, if we make it less efficient for someone to take Highway 51 to Salem, it will shift traffic to Hoffman, where traffic can almost be as bad. And another question that, or a statement that we got is, I like rectangle about, obviously would require mitigation for gas station.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's a interesting ideas. Yeah, definitely something that we're wrestling with here. Because yeah, it's a difficult situation. All right, so let's keep on going. Let's talk about River Road and Main Street. I'm gonna sort of, let's see if I can share my, oh, I went too far. Share my Google Earth. Can you see that, Matt?
Not yet, no.
Can you see it now?
No.
No?
No.
Oh, I know what it is. Hey, I'm glad I asked you because I'm sharing the wrong screen, I bet you. Let me, rather than sharing screen one, I just share. All right. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Perfect. So Main Street and River Road, this is this intersection right here. And obviously we got a lot of regional traffic coming off of this bridge. Right now we get a lot of rear end collisions here, according to your guys' data. And you know, you start adding more traffic to this intersection gets worse and worse. Now, currently, when you look at the intersection, when you have a car sitting in this general location, it really, say, taking a left turn off of the bridge, it hinders right turns in the area. Now, you folks developed some alternatives for this. Would you explain some of the alternatives that you folks are considering here? Oh, muted.
Yeah, happy to. So there are a handful of alternatives, and I will start by saying just about all of the alternatives are going to impact that bridge, which means that it comes with a pretty significant cost. The bridge is in Multnomah, or not Multnomah, sorry, at the Marion County facility. I think is that right, Fred? Marion County. Okay, good. Marion County facility, and so certainly some coordination would be needed to do anything on that bridge, whether it's accommodating additional vehicle traffic or accommodating bicycle and pedestrian traffic. This bridge is something that we would refer to as being functionally obsolete. It no longer meets any of the standards that the city or the county or anybody has for this type of facility. It's still structurally sufficient, so it's not going to fall down. But functionally obsolete is another term that we use for that type of facility pretty frequently. Nevertheless, we recognize that, as Fred mentioned, that there are both some operational and safety issues out here, and so a lot of the alternatives that we developed for this intersection were within consideration to what those issues are. So I don't know if you're going to show the diagrams that we have, Fred, but if not, we had envisioned both a left turn and a right turn coming off the bridge and turning onto Main to the north and Corvallis to the south. And those both either a left or right turn lane, regardless of how it's done, would require some widening there at the bridgehead and potentially some additional work on the bridge to accommodate that. Not a small feat at all there.
One thing I guess I just sort of want to emphasize is, you can see right here that that's the start of the bridge. The start of the bridge is, 60 feet from the stop bar for the intersection, and so trying to figure out how to get a turn lane in here is it is a bit of a difficult proposition.
Yeah, and beyond just the turn pocket itself, every turn lane needs you need a turn lane, you need a little bit of what we would call a taper to get in and out of that turn lane. So it kind of goes beyond just the distance of the need for the turn lane itself. And that's why I don't know that we came up with a single configuration that doesn't impact the bridge to some degree.
Right. A typical car is like 20 feet long, right? So
Yeah.
so that's 3 cars from here to there. So
Yeah. And so some of the other alternatives that we considered were developing turn lanes on Main Street to try to separate out some of the traffic and allow folks to turn from Main Street onto the bridge. So there may be a left turn from Main to the bridge. And maybe one of the hokier alternatives, I'll say, because it's I'm not a big fan, but it does work, would be treating Main Street to the north and the bridge to the west as sort of the through movement, if you can imagine that. So all traffic traveling from the bridge to north onto Main Street would be sort of a free flow movement. All traffic traveling south on Main Street and then turning onto the bridge would also be a free flow movement as it is today. And so just essentially allowing that to operate what we would say free, and then stopping the northbound approach, so that as you're driving north on Corvallis and you approach this intersection, you would actually have to stop. And so what that does is that like the majority of movements, as you can imagine, coming off the bridge or turning a right and heading to the bridge, or coming from the north and making a left. And so just allowing those to operate free and forcing everybody else to stop does improve conditions out there pretty significantly. That said, it would make it challenging for people traveling north to continue north, and for people that are traveling west across the bridge and trying to get to the south. Makes it a little harder for those guys. One big caveat to all this is that if and when that southern arterial comes in, then that redistributes all the traffic at this intersection, so that there's a much higher volume headed further to the south. There's a much higher volume coming across the bridge and then traveling further to the south. And then there's sort of a need for a whole different configuration there. So anything that we come up with, we would want it to address both the need in the near term to accommodate the traffic that we're seeing today, and in the long term to accommodate that sort of redistribution of traffic if and when that arterial comes in place.
Right. That's part of the issue with the poor connectivity from the bridge to G or Mountain Fir. If G is up here and the bridge is here, and then Mountain Fir is down here, well, the bridge doesn't line up with any of them. And so you got to figure out a way to let people go either right or left effectively. in a good way. Now, one option that you guys provided was a roundabout at this location. How does a roundabout sort of size out in this space?
Yeah, so a roundabout would, depending on the size of the roundabout, if you went back to the straight down aerial shot,
Yep, you bet.
you
I'll
can
do that.
you can see that there is actually a fair amount of pavement out here, and a fairly decent amount of what I call right of way to accommodate a potential roundabout there. So that said, that roundabout would likely impact those two trees there at the end of, I believe that's I Street. So both those two trees would likely be impacted. The two properties on the northwest and the southwest corners, not the houses necessarily, but maybe their front yards to some degree, and their landscaping would largely be impacted. And but the roundabout itself could work around some of the other currently, potential barriers. It's difficult to say it's difficult just from some of the conceptual designs we've come up with whether or not it would have an impact on the bridge, but we could certainly place the roundabout in such a way to have less of an impact on the bridge at this location.
Gotcha. And that would better allow something like a through movement, because I mean, there are houses in here too. It's easy to think of this as a three-legged intersection, but really, I mean, there is a manufactured home park in here and some apartments back in here, and so I've been back here a number of times, and just trying to say pull out here, I mean, it's a difficult spot to navigate through here. So yeah, I appreciate that. Now, this idea of stopping the northbound traffic. So if traffic was coming from the south and going north, and then the through movements could come this way and then this way off the bridge, would that be impacted if you put a car or two here? Would that require a turn lane as well, sort of having that through movement?
Yeah, that's a great question and a good observation there, is because yeah, if you had a couple of folks stacked up waiting to make a left turn, they would certainly prevent anybody from continuing through. So that configuration that we had identified in the report also came with a turn lane. So it would again be impacting the bridge in order to accommodate maybe 2 or 3 vehicles waiting while the rest of the vehicles continued around the corner.
Right.
Yeah.
So we did get a couple other comments. One was hopefully any solution at the bridge will incorporate the river trail concept along the river, the continuation of it south to Mountain Fir. I do think that that's something that we're definitely cognizant of. We do think that, wow, it's just spectacular that we have a potential to tie whatever we do with pedestrian connectivity into that sort of backbone system. And so really one of the ideas that I've sort of had since I've been city planner here is trying to pull that trail, pull that recreation space along the river as far westward into the community, into the rest of the community as we can, wherever we can. So yeah, that's definitely something that we're considering, or we plan on including in here, is the continuation of this trail south from where it is now along the river. And another question was, has the rail crossing, and I assume it's at I, been considered as part of the solution to allow traffic to continue westbound? Now, do you want to address the continuation of I Street westbound, or should I?
You might have a better handle on the history of that one. I guess what I could offer up is that new rail crossings are always a challenge, and the rail ODOT rail likes to operate is that if you put in a new crossing, they want you to close an existing crossing. They don't like, one of their core philosophies is no new crossings. Now, that being said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it just can never happen. It's a pretty big hurdle, and so you have to select your potential rail crossings very carefully. And maybe with that as a backdrop, I know that you have a little more history about the potential east-west connection there, the school, the river crossing, and other things making it a little more complicated.
Right. So basically, we have looked at all the various potential ways to connect west and east. It's one thing that I feel like I don't know. I've spent a lot of time doing, and the connection at I essentially stops at a certain point, and then when um, so you could come over, you could get over to Henry Hill, but then you get into the sports fields of Henry Hill, and ultimately you start hitting development. Not only that, if you continued it all the way west, at a certain point you're going to hit a part of the South Fork of Ash Creek that just is not the easiest to cross. You're essentially going at it parallel rather than at a at a better angle than that. And so, just based on all of those factors together, um, it's a challenging sort of connection across. Now, alternatively, I mean, we all know that G Street is not the best connection, but I mean, G Street does go all the way across to 7th and then does link to F to get you over to almost 13th. So that is, I mean, we're definitely considering it. Given, it's such a funny community, right? Because here you look at it, you're like, oh, it's completely flat, easy to construct bike or ped or whatever, but it turns out that in fact there's a number of barriers to actually make those connections. So in this instance, it's the rail, further on, it's the South Fork of Ash Creek. And basically you got that sort of situation going all over the place. That's why we don't have many connections north and south, is because we have Ash Creek there as well. So, so we have a couple other questions here. We have the question, Mr. Bell, you have mentioned that Main and Monmouth streets would qualify for ODOT funding due to being part of Highway 51. Would a new city street, the Southern Arterial, need different financing?
Yeah, certainly something like that. There's a variety of different ways that, again, we haven't got to the point where we've started identifying specific funding mechanisms for something like the Southern Arterial, but what we could envision from, there are grants kind of at the federal level there, and I won't try to remember what all the acronyms are, but there's a build grant is one of the newer ones. It's something that's used to facilitate economic development in communities, much like Independence. There's a variety of grants at the federal level, and at the state level to some degree. If you can show that something like the Southern Arterial will actually take traffic off the highway, then ODOT would potentially contribute funding to something like that. But I also recognize that the Southern Arterial is something that will likely be driven. The need for that arterial is likely going to be driven by the need to provide connections into that southwest concept area. So as that area develops with the new homes and other activities in that area, I could see that playing a large role in funding that street.
Perfect. So another question that we have, and we will probably get to this in a little bit. The question is, given the popularity of cycling through this area, any consideration of more bike lanes? I guess we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's put that one in the parking lot. And then another question was trails are far, a comment, trails are far easier to create in unbuilt environments. Going west is great, but politically challenging. And I'll just say, yes, trails are absolutely easier to develop where there's where development hasn't occurred. I agree with that completely. All right, a comment here. The comment is, and as to using G Street as a possible partial east-west connector, a roundabout on South Main and G Street would redirect the through traffic from using downtown, taking away any impact from Main and Monmouth. Now, we have talked about potentially putting that that roundabout concept instead of here if it's too tight at the end of the bridge, potentially on G Street. Could you explain how something like that would work?
Yeah, that comment certainly sounds like it's speaking your language there, Fred. This is one of Fred's ideas, is dropping a roundabout right here on G Street. G Street is another one of the city's more major facilities, or at least the long-term vision is to have it be one of the more major east-west facilities. So certainly, as it's developed, as it's connected further over to the west, could serve a lot of that east-west traffic. Could be pulling traffic off of Monmouth and Main, and maybe in the long term you could see some more operational issues there. But one of the things that we had talked about was dropping a roundabout right here and allowing this to serve as a place for folks potentially coming off the bridge to come up here and use the roundabout to as well as people, like I think what the question was getting at is that people traveling north on Main Street to try to get around Monmouth and Main intersection to use the roundabout to get west on G Street. So it's certainly not a bad idea. I think maybe the reason why it hasn't floated up to the top yet is because when we looked at when we looked at Main and G Street, the intersection was operating fine in the near term, and in the long term, I believe it's also operating fine in the long term. Although with the roundabout there, it might pull some more traffic in that direction. So I don't want to discard that one yet.
Right. Perfect. All right, so let's, I guess, keep on going. Another sort of key intersection along Main Street is Polk Street and Main Street. And now, I mean, we've talked about this in some significant detail. We have a lot of people that live right here at this intersection. We got a lot of people going and getting very good tacos the northwest at at Los Primos on the northwest side, and we have trucks going through here. So we got just sort of a convergence of a lot of traffic coming through it. Not the best designed intersection. We got pedestrians going back and forth. We've got activities that people love there at the intersection, and we've got and sort of some of the issues here at this intersection seem to be sort of contributing to cut through traffic on Stryker Road. What are some of the options that you folks can envision here at this intersection? I'll get up there.
So is that a question for me, Fred, or is that a question for? Okay.
Yeah, that's you. I mean, anybody else can send comments too about what they think should be done at this intersection. But yeah, I'm primarily asking you right now.
Yeah. So I think that maybe zoom out just a little bit and see if you can show a little part of Stryker Road. So I think Fred mentioned this really early on. As far as east-west connectivity within Independence, you largely have Hoffman to Polk, and you have Monmouth, and those two roadways serve all that east-west traffic. Hoffman and Polk also happen to serve a fair amount of the east-west freight traffic, and traffic coming from some of these industrial areas and from the air park, and a variety of other traffic. So the intersection there at Monmouth and Main and Polk, it has existing operational issues. It has some safety issues. It has some backup issues with trucks attempting to make a right turn at that intersection. And so as a result of that, we've learned somewhat anecdotally, but also from experience, is that it pushes traffic onto Stryker Road, which connects to Main Street further to the north and connects to Polk, right where Polk and Hoffman sort of come together there by the S curves. And so our initially in our analysis, we were looking at the potential for a westbound left turn lane. So that's a left turn lane from Polk onto the highway right there. So developing a left turn lane there to separate out the traffic, to provide some additional capacity and hopefully improve conditions at the intersection. But it's that by itself isn't necessarily enough to address the whole operational issues there. And so we kind of need to think about this intersection in more of that holistic sort of system wide basis. Think about whether if we offered a traffic signal at this location or a roundabout this location, what kind of impact would that have on the larger system? Would we be pulling traffic off of Stryker and funneling it through this intersection? So essentially all that traffic that's trying to bypass this intersection, could we pull that and push it through this intersection to cut down on the cut through traffic on Stryker and essentially address some of the safety and operational issues up at Stryker in Main, while simultaneously addressing the issues right here at Polk and Main. So a left turn lane can get us there. A left turn lane with a traffic signal would be even better. A roundabout actually would do quite well here as well, but would have some more significant impacts that multifamily development there in the northeast corner would likely be impacted by a roundabout. Both of those commercial properties in the southwest corner would at least lose a portion of their parking or their the kind of, I don't think it would get so far as to hit the buildings themselves, but certainly their parking areas would need to be significantly reconfigured. Similar in the southeast, but likely not as much if we were trying to avoid the multifamily property in the northeast corner. One of the other alternatives that we had identified, which is again another sort of hokey one that may not make the cut out here, would be to just simply convert the center travel lane there on the north-south approach to what we call a two-way left turn lane. And so right now that southbound left turn movement has its own separate travel lane. So if you were to convert that into a two-way left turn lane, much like the one on the south side of the intersection, what that does is that allows folks on Polk to make what we call a two-stage left, so they can turn left into that pocket and then merge into traffic. There's a lot of clever names for these types of turn lanes that I won't share right now, but they do work in a lot of situations. And Monmouth Street, pretty much from 7th all the way to the west part of town, has that type of configuration. It's not, I will say though, it's not as typical to have that kind of a configuration at an intersection like this, because Polk is a higher classification street that accommodates a higher amount of traffic, and so you normally would have a configuration much more like what you have shown than having that two-way left turn lane. But again, it was just an option.
Right. We do have two-way left turn lanes like down here throughout the rest of Maine. So if you've ever pulled out of the River Place apartments, to anybody listening, it would be a similar sort of approach as that. So okay, or anywhere on Monmouth, you're from 8th or whatever on. You're exactly right. So okay. So I think that's great. Now, what are some of the pedestrian impacts that like how? Because I mean, if we sort of have this vision of making pulling some of this pedestrian this great pedestrian space that we have along the river up into some of these neighborhoods. One of the things that makes a whole ton of sense to me is to pull it up right here so these folks in this apartment um, uh, can actually access that space. How would you improve pedestrian crossings at that location given some of those options?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like a left turn lane wouldn't necessarily impact the the east-west pedestrian connections there. But if you were to add a traffic signal, the traffic signal, as most people are probably familiar with, would provide a dedicated time for pedestrians to cross the street. And so, it gives people on the north and southbound approaches to the intersection a red light. And so they would need to stop and pedestrians could go during that time. So a traffic signal is pretty common and can accommodate them. A roundabout can also be pretty safe for pedestrians as well. And there's a variety of treatments that you can add to a roundabout and further enhance that. Things like rectangular rapid flash beacons, which are those really bright flashing lights that help with crosswalks, and a number of other things. I think you had mentioned we're going to talk about ped bike here in a moment, but yeah, this further to the east there is a vision for a continuation of one of those riverfront trails to connect here into Polk, and so some sort of an enhanced crossing there would make a lot of sense. One thing I'll mention before we move away from that, though, is that ODOT is pretty careful about where they install enhanced pedestrian crossings on their facilities. They like to make sure that that they are needed and warranted, and all those other terms that they're designed to appropriately accommodate the amount of pedestrian activity that they anticipate at that crossing location. And so it's not typically something that you see as part of a transportation system plan unless it's been fairly thoroughly vetted as a potential improvement.
Gotcha. So, shoot, let's just, I think that's good. So if we did address that intersection there, then you think that potentially we could pull some of this cut through traffic off of Stryker?
Yeah, I think that given where we anticipate some of the growth to occur in this particular area over the long term, that funneling that traffic down to Polk and over to the Polk and Main Street intersection it makes sense. People are going to want to inherently go to the north. So I think that we would probably also want to see some treatments along Stryker Road to try to further encourage the use of Polk and the intersection of Polk and Main. So I'm not necessarily talking about things like speed bumps or anything like that, but some treatments along Stryker that would make it a little less of a thoroughfare for folks to just to jump on it and zip all the way up there to the north.
Perfect. I think that that's a good point. It's a good segue to a comment that we got. We received the comment, I am concerned about diverting traffic to G, which is solely residential and frankly would put a heavy impact on an area that has a very large Latino population, especially following closing of HH. Um, uh, so I think I think that your point about Stryker Road is something that we can clearly apply on certain roads, like by making connections and making connections safe and simple. It doesn't necessarily imply that it's going to be a very fat. I mean, we're not taking Hoffman Road and putting it down Stryker or down G. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that that's good. I mean, definitely. I mean, that's one thing that I want to consider as we're doing this is there's certain streets that we want to connect. We want to provide people alternatives, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we want to make them major thoroughfares. So definitely appreciate the comment. Sorry that that wasn't completely clear earlier. So
Yeah, I think maybe before you introduce the next subject, I just would say that, and this is kind of where we started, where we think about east-west and north-south connectivity throughout the entire community. And we want to try to emphasize traffic along those sort of key roadways, whether it's Hoffman and Polk or Monmouth or the Southern Arterial from east to west. If it's like those are sort of the streets that we want to focus the majority of the I'll say like the through traffic to people that are going kind of the distance between those areas. Those are the highest classification streets. Those are the highest like streets in terms of the hierarchy of streets. But below that are so those are the arterial streets, and below that are streets that we call collectors, and the collectors collect traffic from the neighborhood streets and from the local streets, and they funnel them into the arterial streets. And so that's streets like Ash Street and 4th Street, 7th and 13th and Gun Club, and all those streets. They collect the traffic and they funnel it to the arterials. And so we think about the street system in terms of the hierarchy of streets and how we want to route the traffic around. And that's why there tends to be an emphasis on specific locations and with the intention of directing traffic around there. So in other words, we don't want lots of traffic on the neighborhood streets and the local streets. We don't want those to be used for cut through traffic. So we want to do everything we can to the larger and the higher classification streets to ensure that they can accommodate that traffic and discourage folks from going another way.
perfect. We got a couple other questions. I sure appreciate everybody for watching, sending in these questions. So one of the comments is the intersection of Hoffman, Stryker, and Polk is difficult for pedestrians, and that's really this thing right here. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we have I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did they put a rapid flash beacon at this?
There is a yes. There
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, so we've talked about this intersection a little bit, and I recognize that this crossing can have some fairly significant pedestrian activity.
Yeah, well, it was pretty funny in the analysis. Your analysis has people go out and count traffic, right? Or somebody counts the traffic, and this was the most crossed pedestrian intersection because I think it must have been at the change of a marquee shift or something like that for this business here. And so this popped out as the most used pedestrian intersection during peak hours.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not as familiar with what the concern is here, but one of the things that we have heard and that we've discussed is and I don't know if you can use your mouse to kind of guide us around, but that street right just to the north, that street right there is also called the Hoffman Street, and so one of the concerns that I see when I look at this intersection is how closely spaced Hoffman Street is to Hoffman Street or to Polk Street right there at that intersection. And so what that means is that if any, and even though as you're driving west on that segment of Hoffman Street, you approach that intersection, it says right turn only. There's nothing to ensure that people are going to go right there. Certainly people can go left there. So we have talked about a few things that we could do to try to clean up the geometry here at this intersection. And I expect that we'll get a handful of comments as soon as I say this, but one of those things is to close this connection right here, this Hoffman right at that Stryker. And if you zoom out just a little bit, then what you'd see is that there are options to get further to the east and then back to the south to reconnect to Polk Street right there. And so you could do quite a bit to try to enhance that connection to that commercial area, um, and potentially eliminate any sort of vehicular traffic coming to and from that intersection.
Perfect. So, uh, great question. Thank you for the question. How does the new F Street Bridge, when finished, play into the picture? And I guess we're going back down to G, but it's a great question because here we are reconstructing the F Street Bridge. It's going through design right now. And that project has been in the works for years. And so um, when we were originally looking at that, when I came and I didn't know any better, I said, "Hey, how hard would it be to potentially put that F Street Bridge on a different street?" And the DOT is not willing to fund a replacement bridge on a different street. And so that's sort of how that situation goes there. Ultimately, this E and to F or G to F is going to sort of be sort of the nature of how the transportation system works for the foreseeable future. So that's how that plays into the picture. It's a great question. It would have been great. For example, my original idea was, hey, let's take E all the way across and push this thing through all the way out here to 16th. That was an idea in our last transportation system plan. I mean, it is still a possibility. We would have to get behind Central Plaza here. So anyways, happy to go into that more potentially another time. And we'll talk a little bit more about an idea for East Street in a little bit. Another question is, a roundabout at Main and the bridge is a great idea. Will there be problems getting ODOT to agree to plans like this on a state highway? Now, would you like to address that?
Yeah, so ODOT is definitely becoming more receptive to roundabouts, and they've been, in fact, we've been seeing more and more roundabouts on ODOT facilities in more recent times, and surprisingly, in some cases, on some of their more high-speed facilities. So we see a lot of high-speed roundabouts. They're also becoming a little more like the freight community is becoming a little is warming up to roundabouts as well. They appreciate not having to stop as often as they do at like signalized intersections or all-way stop control intersections. And roundabouts can be designed to accommodate freight traffic pretty easily. So yeah, it's a good question.
Cool. We got a question. If you need right away on the east side of Main near the bridge or a block north, will there be riparian/flood restrictions and EIS processes that take a decade?
Probably, yeah. And I don't, it's a good question. And something like that, if you did need to push further to the east, it would probably take some time.
Right. So the punchline is you would try and design the thing in the best way that you possibly could, given the vehicles that were likely to use the facility.
Yep.
And you would try and keep the footprint as small as you possibly could. So yeah. All right. Okay, so we got some clarification about the Stryker Polk Hoffman pedestrian crossing. It's the comment is the concern is connecting from northwest corner of Hoffman to Stryker to south of Polk, and that's exactly right. That's a great comment. I have been walking out there, and I have made this crossing right here. Which I think is the crossing that he's talking about. That is not the best pedestrian crossing right now.
Yeah, I'd almost say it's another good reason why if we were able to clean up the geometry of the intersection by closing off that connection at Hoffman, the eastern side of Hoffman, right there at Stryker Road, we could potentially narrow up that crossing a bit, reduce the curb radius, and make it a little friendlier for people to cross. You could also put in a crosswalk just to reinforce the notion that people are going to be there, and remind uh, remind people to stop as they're approaching in an appropriate location.
Right. I think that that's a good comment. Can you explain what narrowing curb radius is and making the pedestrian crossing shorter means? Uh-oh, you're
Yeah,
okay.
sorry, I'm about ready to, my headphones are about ready to die on me here, so I gotta plug them in. But yeah, so that the northwest corner right there, that what I referred to as the curb radius is it's kind of it's like a big circle, and we would want to make it into a smaller circle, which would it depending on the type of traffic that utilizes the intersection, we could potentially make that one smaller. And then we would try to, usually what we try to do is we try to tee up the intersection as best we can. And so right now it sort of curves right there as it approaches the intersection. So we would probably try to redesign it so that it would have a smaller circle right there at the corner, and then a narrower crossing to get to kind of get back up and around.
Perfect. So he also responded, the current curb cut, which it looks like is about right there, is behind the stop line. So yep, looking at that intersection more. Thank you for that. We sure appreciate that. We sure appreciate those comments. Thank you. All right, so let's keep on going here. The next issue, sort of switching gears off of Main Street, out of the north area and going straight down to the southwest. Now, the City of Independence has a southwest plan for the development of this area. We're anticipating over the next 20 years, hundreds of new houses in this area. So this plan that we have, this Southwest Area Concept Plan, you can see it online, it sort of designs this street network through this area. Now, these are key connections, and we recognize that they're key connections. We're not going to really focus on these connections, though, as part of this. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, Alan. It says, no, curb cut is north. I apologize for that. Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you again. All right. So anyways, we're not going to necessarily get into these connections in detail tonight. This is articulated in that plan. What I think is really kind of important for us to consider is how these streets then come out and relate to some of these to how this development is actually going to funnel into the rest of the system. And so things like Talmadge and 16th is going to get some of this traffic. How then too does this traffic come up here to 13th, or how does it interact with what's going on at 7th? How does it interact with what's at G? And then even out here, as you sort of mentioned, if we construct this southern arterial, there are going to be left turns and whatnot coming out of here. So I guess some of the options that we've considered at these various intersections include roundabouts, traffic lights, and a two-way left turn lane, and also the idea of trying to encourage people to take alternative routes sort of off of Monmouth or through town. Now, I guess that's my question for you is, Monmouth is a state highway. Monmouth Street is a state highway. What is the degree that we're going to be able to put some of these improvements along the road to get people effectively in and out of these neighborhoods?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Fred. The so, so again, Monmouth being a state facility and the state sort of regulating what types of intersection treatments you can use. It sort of establishes the rules and the regulations and the requirements and the analysis requirements for that kind of stuff. And so things like traffic signals and roundabouts are they have warrants for these things, like whether or not the volume is going to be sufficient to warrant a traffic signal or warrant something like a roundabout. And in most cases, that those key intersections you had identified, the ones that don't already have a traffic signal, they're for the most part they are warranted, and so they can be used along these roadways. They can, they're not entirely interchangeable, but in some cases, some communities sort of embrace the roundabout and try to use it as much as possible, and others, people feel more comfortable with traffic signals and may go forward with those. There are benefits and disbenefits to each one, but the two-way left turn lane is also compelling, as we talked about, and as you've experienced in your own community. There is a two-way left turn lane along a large part of this, and having the two-way left turn lane means that people can turn left from the highway onto these minor streets, and from the minor streets onto the highway, and it does make things operate a little bit smoother. This I really like this diagram you have right here, because as it is today, that two-way left turn lane stops right there at Ash Creek Bridge. Ash Creek Bridge is relatively narrow. I believe it doesn't even have standard sidewalks and bike lanes to help you get across either. And so continuing a two-way left turn lane would obviously require eliminating the bridge, or not, or replacing the bridge. And as you get further to the east, it would also, we'd have to consider some potential trade-offs as the right of way, as maybe not the right of way, but the curb to curb width narrows a little bit. Fred, maybe I'll look to you to see if the right of way also narrows a bit there. But certainly the curb to curb width narrows, and maintaining a two-way left turn lane, then we start to consider trade-offs between bike lanes, or the type of bike lanes that we might want to see on this roadway, and the ability to provide that two-way left turn lane.
Right. It's one of the questions that it's one of the questions that I really have for. This is a big issue from my perspective, because the bike ped space that we have where the two-way left turn lane is right now is not the best bike ped space. And so if we continued something like that, even as the curb to curb width decreases, then all of a sudden we're going to be sort of foreclosing the option to put things like bike lanes on Monmouth Avenue. Is that correct? Or like, what is is there any alternative? What are some of the alternatives to address this? And I guess go into those a little more.
So I'll start with one thing that you can do is take sort of what you have out there today, which is your existing curb to curb width, and try to figure out a configuration that works for everybody. So that's maybe you stripe your bike lanes in there, you maintain your 2 lanes in both directions. And then you have to address issues at all the kind of the key intersections at 7th and at 4th, and further on. And that's probably that's a fairly reasonable approach, I'd say. Another thing you could do is you could make that trade-off between the turn lane and the bike lanes, provide the turn lane, then you don't necessarily need to address conditions at those intersections because the turn lane will address that. Or there's a more extreme example, which is to move the curb is to build the cross section that you want, which is bike lanes, travel lanes, and turn lanes as far down the roadway as you want. And I would say all the way down to something like 4th Street would probably be appropriate, or even yeah, 4th Street's probably the best because that's about where you start to see a lot of that on-street parking and the commercial activity in the downtown. So providing that center two-way left turn lane, providing the curbs and the bike lanes means that providing the turn lane, the center turn lane, the travel lanes, and the bike lanes means that you're relocating the curb. And when you go to relocate the curb, that's either done incrementally when redevelopment occurs, which based on some of the buildings that are located in these areas are likely not to redevelop anytime soon. Some pretty nice homes and some newer businesses in those locations. But you can wait for redevelopment to occur and move them out incrementally. Or you could do it as a streetscape enhancement, or as a larger capital project where you go through and do the whole thing all at once, pushing the curbs out, reconfiguring the sidewalks and landscape strips. And it's kind of an extreme example and costs a lot of money and has lots of impacts on residential and commercial properties. And but you get the cross section that you want. Or there's something in between where maybe you do a little bit on the incremental basis, maybe you do a whole lot of it on a more capital improvement basis. So there are definitely options that are available to getting like ultimately what you want. So the key is to identify steps and that you can do sort of along the way and without precluding anything that you ultimately want in the long term. I know I just said a whole lot of stuff.
No, it's perfect. So, because I mean, it really, there are trade-offs here. I mean, Monmouth Street is fundamentally like it's hugely important to the character of this community. You know, it connects downtown Independence and downtown Monmouth. It handles our transit. It is where peds and bikes travel. Is the main connection for peds and bikes between downtown Independence and downtown Monmouth. All of that stuff. We're asking this road to really handle a lot, and then we're asking it to accommodate some of this additional traffic that we have coming from the southwest area. So really trying to figure out how the road can do it elegantly is something that I think that that we need to figure out. Now, one thing I'll just point out about Monmouth Street is the fact that almost no, this is the west portion of it. I think that here's the creek right here. This is 7th. Basically, all of these intersections right here don't quite line up, which is just which is inconvenient, right? It would be really nice if they lined up. And so that really makes a two-way left turn in this section of the road kind of important, right? Isn't that the case, Matt?
Definitely, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons why I've actually heard that the two-way left turn lane was not continued on this side was because this was where the historic portion of the community was. And the look and feel of a two-way left turn lane through this portion was not desired as part of the last TSP. So anyways, I think that that's good. Let's just see what else we have here. Now, this will be the last issue, and I mean, it's been a long day. So I assume that other people are feeling about like I'm feeling. So we won't keep you that much longer. We did get a couple of comments before we get onto this, so I'll read them off. One says, I believe there will be community support for increasing efficiency for travel, however, not at the expense of our historic downtown and the businesses. We wholeheartedly agree with that comment. The last thing we want to do is to kill downtown. And we got a comment, Skybridge walkway for Hoffman.
Yeah. Well, maybe just a couple things. So on the first one, and definitely recognize that we don't have like as Fred mentioned, nothing that we're going to do. We have no intentions of destroying the downtown or the commercial viability of downtown. Everything that we're doing hopefully is intended to really sort of emphasize connections to and from the downtown and like really boost economic development in the community. So that's one of the things we're really going for. And as far as the overcrossings, and I don't know if that was tongue in cheek or not, but overcrossings, there is a time and place for overcrossings, and where I've seen them be the most effective is and this sounds a little bit extreme, but when there is no other option. So if you put an overcrossing here at Hoffman and didn't fence off both the north and south sides of Hoffman Street, you would have people walking right underneath your overcrossing, guaranteed. So there's I have seen. I used to live right next door to an overcrossing, and always got a kick out of seeing people walk underneath it. So it's pretty good.
That's funny. That's funny. So sort of ending on a lighter note, and I should just acknowledge, like, there's other issues throughout the community. If you have other issues that you'd like to talk about, feel free to give me a call. I work at City Hall. You can find my number. Just give that number a call. I'm happy to talk about this. Also, I'll take any sort of emails, any sort of way that you want to communicate with me. We do not want to stop good ideas, right? We do not want to, and we want your perspectives. We want your ideas. So anyways, yeah, if you've got them, feel free to call or whatever. So anyways, the last thing that we'll talk about is bike and ped. Now, one of the things that I actually told our planning commission was, if you can design a bike route to the city of Monmouth that I haven't considered, I would give them $20. And probably the the offer still stands. If somebody's got a good idea for a bike route, I should say a good bike route, not just any old thing, I will give them $20. So if somebody, yeah. So anyways, things that we're really thinking about, and I thank you, whoever had the comment earlier about bike and ped. We do not do a good job going west and east through this community and connecting into Monmouth. The fact that we are so flat, the fact that we are a college community, and the fact that we do not have bikers, bicyclists, is crazy to me. So I think it is an indication of just how poor our non-motorized network is. And so some of the alternatives that we're considering are enhancing bike lanes on Hoffman, right down to Polk, really trying to make that work better for bicyclists. Right now, Hoffman, at a certain point, it feels like you can go on it pretty fast. The curb to curb width seems like it's such that you could probably even expand out the bike lanes that are on it through a portion of it, which might not be a bad idea. Also, there's other ways to potentially get from downtown Independence to downtown Monmouth. So if we consider this as being the trails along the river, potentially we could hop up to Williams and then sort of skirt the north part of the sewer treatment plant over to Marigold and do something like a bicycle boulevard on Marigold over to Ash Creek Elementary. Matt, would you explain what a bicycle boulevard is and what sort of treatments that would entail?
Sure. Yeah, a bike boulevard is really it's a street that is designed to primarily accommodate bicyclists. So it's usually a lower traffic volume, travel speed type of roadway where people feel comfortable riding their bike in the middle of the roadway and or with traffic, which is largely just going to be traffic from folks that live on the roadway. And so some of the tricks that we use to ensure that is to provide various diverters or restrict certain movements in certain locations to ensure that it's primarily like local traffic only. It's not cut through or higher speed, higher volume traffic.
Perfect. So that could potentially that could potentially get us, this alternative here could get us potentially to the border of Monmouth, and then Monmouth can continue that up to the Hoffman intersection. There is the Ash Creek Trail that's been an idea and has had phases built of it through the community. That is another way. Monmouth Street is clearly another west-east route that we could really try and make better. Right now, it's not a great place to ride a bike. I've really been emphasizing that, it feels like, throughout this project. And then I guess one of the things that I feel like is worth bringing up is back to that East Street idea, where potentially East Street could be something like a bicycle boulevard, and then continuing that behind Central Plaza and then ultimately over into Monmouth to connect with their Jackson Street, where they could potentially use a similar sort of treatment, bicycle boulevard sort of concept along Jackson Street. Are there any other good ways to get between Monmouth and Independence, Matt?
On a bike?
On a bike.
Well, so if you're offering me the same $20 challenge, I think that I would fall pretty flat as well to find anything else that you haven't already considered. There's likely to be some more neighborhood connections that don't necessarily provide larger connections that we're talking about. So really, what just to reiterate what you've already said here, Fred, is that what you're highlighting here and what we're talking about here is providing those larger east-west connections from eastern part of Independence over to Monmouth, over to like the 99 Trail and things like that. And so there are certainly going to be some shorter connections that can work, that can serve to provide that access. We're not talking about like the north-south connections through here, but for the most part, I think what you've identified are kind of the key ones that we've talked about.
That's a good point. That's just sort of like a backbone sort of east-west route. Now there are all sorts of interesting sort of streets that we could pursue something like a bike boulevard on. One of the ideas that we've come up with was exactly the I Street one, which it might be easier to get a pedestrian crossing across I Street than it would to get a vehicular crossing. Is it in fact true that it might be easier to do a pedestrian crossing?
Yeah, a pet bridge is going to be, I mean, they're not significantly cheaper than a regular bridge, but they are cheaper than a regular.
I'm talking at
bridge.
grade.
At grade. Oh, I got you.
Could we do a pedestrian crossing at grade at I, for example?
So, yeah, a pedestrian, an at-grade pedestrian rail crossing is considered to be just about the same as an at-grade vehicle crossing.
Oh,
So you're going to run into the same issues as you would if you're trying to get a vehicle crossing there.
gotcha. Well, that stinks.
Yeah.
uh, uh, all right. Well, so I mean, sort of thinking about this, I'll just throw it out there as an idea. I mean, we've talked about this, but I do really like the idea of this East Street idea, sort of functioning as something like a non-motorized main street between downtown Independence and downtown Monmouth to allow people to get back and forth between the communities. It would tie into all the commercial that we have in the communities, the Central Plaza area, the Ware Mart, and then the new Ross complex. So I do think that that is something that makes a whole ton of sense from my perspective. It's close enough to Monmouth Street where we could potentially create that sort of parallel route, so we're not having to address um, pedestrianism like significantly, maybe expanding right away width on Monmouth Street. Um, is that a potential good approach? What and would people use it, or are people going to keep on walking on Monmouth Street?
Well, if you're asking me, I would say you're certainly going to still have people walking on Monmouth Street to some extent. There's a lot of commercial activity. There's a lot of residential homes right along Monmouth Street, and so I think walking on Monmouth Street is still likely to be a thing, particularly for people that are looking to access different land uses. Now, biking on Monmouth Street, on the other hand, that could very well, unless again someone's trying to access something directly on Monmouth Street, I could see that shifting down to something like F, and having F be that east-west parallel route that serves a nicer, more comfortable, provides a nicer, more comfortable environment and serve a higher volume of folks than you would see on Monmouth Street. And like we've talked about before, it could offer up one of those. It could allow us to maybe emphasize other types of traffic on Monmouth rather than trying to accommodate everybody all in the same place. And so, but then I could also see, and I know that we've heard this from some of the community members and some of our project team members, that F Street is also a nice place to walk. And so, again, if you're not trying to access a particular land use on Monmouth, then you could come down to F Street and use that for sort of more on a recreational basis.
Right, right. I do. Yeah, I think that's uh, good. I just completely blanked on the point that I was going to make.
Well, particularly if you have if you're talking about integrating some trails here further to the west of 13th there, if you're talking about providing like a ped bridge over Ash Creek and continuing F all the way into downtown, then yeah, that'd be a really nice place for folks to walk
Right. Yeah.
and bike.
It would be E, and it would be able to tie into the trails and then all the way down to behind Central Plaza, and all of that stuff. Uh,
Sorry, I think I said F there, but yeah, I meant
yeah.
E.
No, that's fine. I knew what you meant. Uh, uh, so yeah, I guess that really. I guess that's really pretty much it. The questions have stopped coming in. We did get one comment. Main and Deanne Drive is a difficult pedestrian crossing to reach Parks and Trails, and there's no doubt about it. There is I did live in these apartments for a while. You can't see them on this aerial, but this is Main and Deanne Drive. It's difficult to get across this. There's no doubt about that. And then, yeah, somebody said thank you. So we sure appreciate that as well. So I guess that's basically it. Matt, is there anything else that you would like to add? What are the next steps for this project?
Yeah, maybe one quick thing to add, and then I'll talk a little bit about next steps. Is again just on the particularly on the ped bike front that I guess because we've had a lot of questions about stuff on how we're going to improve connections to some of the trails and some of the key locations in the community, like the downtown and other areas. That even though it was kind of at the tail end of our presentation, like pedestrian and enhancing the pedestrian and bicycle environment is one of the real key goals of the TSP update. And we did talk a lot about the east-west pedestrian bicycle connections. There are an equal number, if not more, on the north-south side. We're definitely incorporating all this stuff from the parks plans, from all the new trail connections along the Ash Creek and along the creeks there in the southwest. So there's a lot that we're thinking about from a ped bike perspective.
Right. You're exactly right, Matt. I appreciate you bringing that up. And yeah, totally. That's great.
And as far as next steps, and I kind of mentioned this early on, is that we've largely wrapped up our alternatives analysis, and so we have a breadth of information to go through and pull out what we've identified as our preferred alternatives. Those preferred alternatives will be further evaluated and prioritized and sort of organized into different project lists, I'll say. And so there's a two-step process. One, there will be a memo that identifies the preferred alternatives, and then that largely filters right into the draft TSP. As far as opportunities for future involvement goes, is that once we finish our next tech memo, which is the preferred alternatives memo, we will have a series of our project advisory committees. We will plan to do another briefing with the Planning Commission and or the City Council, and we'll have another virtual open house, or assuming we can't meet in person by then, another virtual open house to present this information and to get additional feedback from you folks.
Totally. And this seemed like this worked fairly well, so we might do something like this too. So anyways, yeah, I sure appreciate it. Thanks, Matt, for joining us. Thanks for talking through all of this stuff. I sure appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's good. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, take care. See ya.
Bye, guys.